With the press of a trigger, the Remington Model 700 roared to life. The bullet tore from the barrel, traveling at over 2,500 feet per second. It was a perfect shot in the making. Every variable had been accounted for: wind speed, temperature, humidity, even the invisible pull of gravity. Police sniper Jeffrey Boyes watched through his scope as the bullet raced across the 980 feet toward its intended target. But nobody had counted on what happened next. The gunman yanked violently on the makeshift leash, speaker wire tied around the hostage's waist, dragging her back into the electronics store. The glass door, which had been propped open moments earlier, closed slightly. The shifting door was all it took to change everything. Just millimeters of glass now stood in the bullet's path, a fragile but critical barrier. Instead of delivering a fatal strike, the bullet veered off course. The slight deflection sent it slicing harmlessly through the gunman's ear instead. A sharp, searing pain was all the gunman felt, but it was enough. He knew there was a sniper out there. Then all hell broke loose. Hours earlier. It's 1 p.m. on April 4th, 1991, and a red Toyota Corolla pulls into the parking lot of the Good Guys electronics store in the south end of Sacramento, California. Inside the unassuming vehicle are 4 Vietnamese immigrants. Brothers Loy, Pham, and Long Kak Nguyen, ages 21, 19, and 17, and their school friend Quang Tran. The 4 immigrated from Vietnam as refugees in the wake of the North Vietnamese's takeover of the country. Their families had spent some time in Malaysia and then an Indonesian refugee camp before arriving in America. Their journey had been brutal. In Malaysia, they'd been treated as unwanted outsiders, and the refugee camp had been a nearly lawless place. The authorities were happy with keeping trouble contained inside the camp as long as it didn't spill beyond its boundaries. In America, their lives were slightly easier, especially for Quang Tran and his family, but their struggles were far from over. They still faced near daily racism and bullying for their Vietnamese ethnicity. It didn't matter from which side of the North-South divide their families had come from. To many Americans, the wounds of the Vietnam War were still fresh, fueled by the 50,000 killed and more than triple that number wounded. The 4 kids suffered from a range of behavioral problems. Tran and Long had both been expelled for stealing athletic equipment and trying to set fire to the high school's gym. Loy had dropped out of school altogether. Only Pham was still enrolled in high school, but with no plans to graduate. All they wanted was to go back to Vietnam. They wanted to fight as part of the underground resistance to the North Vietnamese takeover of their country. To do that, they hatched a plan that would end in tragedy. The 4 exit the Toyota and quickly move toward the store's entrance. The California sun blazes down, casting sharp shadows on the pavement, but the bright day offers little comfort. The Good Guys electronics store is quiet, with only a handful of customers browsing its aisles. The front of the store has huge glass window displays that allow the 4 to look deep into the store itself. Later, it'll give the police and the news media a front row seat to the unfolding nightmare. The front door is suddenly thrown open, a man rushing out as somewhere behind him, store employees yell after him. Almost instinctively, the boys reach into their jackets, and in one fluid motion they draw 3 pistols and a shotgun, legally purchased by Loy at a local Big 5 sporting goods store. The man carrying a stolen stereo in his hands comes to a skidding halt as the 4 Vietnamese boys raise their weapons at him. They shout and they gesture for him to get back into the store. The shoplifter throws his hands up, the stolen stereo an afterthought as it crashes to the ground. A slow, chilling realization spreads across the man's face. These are not police officers. Panic sets in as the boys shove him roughly through the door. Without hesitation, they unleash a barrage of gunfire into the ceiling. Shards of tile and plaster rain down, drawing startled screams and gasps from the customers and the employees inside. They managed to catch 40 employees and customers, including several elderly patrons and 2 women with children, all completely by surprise. 2 of the gunmen begin to shoot at security cameras, while the other 2 try to gain control over the panicked, screaming crowd. Leveling their weapons at them seems to do the trick. The fear-stricken hostages are herded away from the store's large front windows and toward the back aisles. Long grabs one of the employees by the shirt and shoves him toward the front of the building, telling him to lock the doors. The employee nods nervously and rushes toward the entrance, but instead of locking the doors, he rushes through them and makes an escape. This only infuriates the rest of the gunmen. One of them suggests shooting a hostage or 2 to send a message and deter anyone else from trying to escape. For a brief moment, it seems the situation is on the brink of spiraling out of control. But he is swiftly talked down. If they start killing hostages now, it'll significantly reduce their negotiating power with the police later. And the boys have demands, instructing the store manager to call 911 and report the hostage situation. At 1:33 p.m., the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department Special Enforcement Detail, its own version of elite SWAT forces, is in the final stages of gearing up for a high-stakes drug raid. The target is a notorious methamphetamine producer operating deep within the city. Local police contact the Sheriff's Department, knowing their said team is the best equipped and trained to handle the hostage situation should things go south. Calls are placed out to off-duty team members who immediately drop their plans and rush to the armory to gear up. Meanwhile, authorities prepare to open negotiations, hoping to defuse the volatile situation before it gets further out of control. The Special Enforcement Detail remains the last resort option. Their involvement signals only one thing: the failure of every other tactic. Throughout history, hostage takers have often turned their guns on their captives the instant they sense an assault is underway. It's a grim reality that hangs over every decision made by law enforcement, and in this case, the unknowns are plentiful and daunting. How well armed are these hostage takers? Did they bring any explosives? Authorities fear the gunmen might be tied to a criminal gang known as the Oriental Boys, a connection that could mean access to significant firepower. However, this doesn't fit the gang's usual profile. They're known for petty crimes and street violence, not hostage situations. Fearing that this might be a new Far East terror group, calls are placed to the local FBI desk. It doesn't take long for the local media to swarm the scene, tipped off by monitoring police scanners and informants inside the police department. Soon the area outside of the Good Guys electronics store is a media circus, with various news teams jostling for the best vantage point. The fact that the big store windows give news cameras a view into the store is helping the event to quickly become a national spectacle. Inside the store, the boys quickly realize the growing presence of media and law enforcement outside, and the danger posed by the store's massive windows. They order several hostages to the front of the store. Panic and confusion ripple through the group as the hostages are lined up against the windows, their bodies positioned as human shields. A trained sniper would have little problem striking one of the gunmen towering over the hostages, but the threat of retaliation looms large. The slightest misstep could ignite a chaotic, uncontrollable shootout. The crisis management team establishes contact with the hostage takers through a landline connected directly to local police headquarters. The boys' demands vary, and as the conversation drags on, it soon becomes increasingly clear they don't have a solid plan. This worries the police even more. They aren't dealing with professionals. These kids are a bunch of amateurs who don't have a clear-cut plan. The negotiators exchange uneasy glances, realizing they're dealing with dangerous and unpredictable young men. As the situation continues to deteriorate, it makes the probability of one or more of the hostage takers acting irrationally greater. Right now, they want $4 million in cash and 4 bulletproof vests. The negotiators latch on to a potential opening. Bulletproof vests are something the police can provide, but only in exchange for hostages. The voice on the other end of the line grows tense, but reluctantly accepts. It's becoming increasingly clear the police may need to move to a more kinetic solution. The said team is already on location, having pored over building plans before arriving. Avoiding detection is paramount. The tactical team knows they must remain invisible to both the hostage takers inside and the news cameras outside. It's almost certain the gunmen are monitoring live news coverage from within the store, and the sight of a van unloading heavily armed officers could seriously destabilize the situation. To avoid attention from the cameras, the special tactics team has arrived in civilian vehicles. They pass through the police cordon, and they maneuver to the rear of the strip mall that houses the electronics store. There's no good options for entry. The front was obviously out of the question, as the large windows made it impossible to approach unseen. The rear freight door wasn't alarmed, which presents a possible entry point. However, to get to the door unseen, they would have to pass through the neighboring fabric store. The team silently enters the fabric store and quickly moves to the rear wall, adjacent to the Good Guys store. A narrow hallway stretches between the two shops, dimly lit and lined with storage shelves. At the end of the hall lies a storage room, offering a concealed path into the Good Guys store. Above them, the ceiling consists of removable panels, concealing the HVAC system and layers of insulation. An officer carefully lifts one of the panels and threads a flexible camera equipped with a fisheye lens through the narrow gap, guiding it toward the adjacent electronics store. But something is wrong. Two of the gunmen order some of the hostages to stack boxes of equipment against the rear doors that connect the store to the hallway. That same hallway the special tactics team is counting on for their entry. Still, there are 2 small victories for the tactical team. First, the gunmen remain oblivious to the fisheye camera dangling above them. Second, while the barricade of boxes being erected against the rear doors presents a new obstacle, it's far from insurmountable. The team knows it'll slow their response, but it won't stop them. But the camera isn't as helpful as the team had hoped. Its fisheye lens, while offering a wide-angle view, struggles to track the gunmen accurately as they move through the store. Shelves and stacks of merchandise obstruct the line of sight, leaving key areas of the floor obscured. But it was better than nothing, and soon they'll need every small advantage they can get. At the front of the store, a police officer has already delivered one of the bulletproof vests. To convince the gunman he was unarmed, the officer stripped down to his underwear. In exchange for the vest, they had promised to release 9 hostages. But when the deal was done, only the woman they had sent to retrieve the vest and her 2 children were set free. After an hour of painstaking negotiation, the gunman agreed to release another woman and her 3 children. As they stumble to safety, they begin to paint a clearer picture of the chaos unfolding inside. The boys are growing increasingly agitated, their frustration boiling over as they accuse the police of intentionally stalling. But the hostages reveal something more alarming, a crack forming within the group. One of the gunmen, Loy, seems ready to give up entirely. The police don't have to wait long to confirm their worst fears. Inside the store, tempers flare, and the volatile situation teeters on the brink of collapse. Loy contacts the police directly and tells the cops that the group is ready to surrender, but on 2 conditions. First, they must be allowed to keep their bulletproof vests and weapons while in prison, for their own protection. It's a ridiculous and completely impossible condition, but it's better than the previous demands for a flight to Vietnam and a military helicopter capable of seating 50. The negotiator tries to calm Loy down, promising the boys a short prison sentence and even regaining their vests and weapons after the release, but only if no harm comes to the hostages. Loy tells the police that he needs to talk it over with the group. It's approaching 9 p.m. by now, and police see this as the first sign of good news. Inside the fabric store, the special tactics team relaxes slightly. Maybe things won't get ugly after all. When Loy picks up the phone, he delivers some bad news. He is willing to surrender, but the rest of the group refuses. What the police don't know is that a coup has taken place amongst the group. The other 3 think that Loy has lost his nerve, and they have usurped him as leader. Finally, Long answers the police negotiator's call, and he says he's in charge now. The demand for a flight to Vietnam is made once more, and this time, there will be no surrender. At 9 p.m., the standoff takes a grim turn. Long shoots 20-year-old Sean McIntyre in the leg before shoving him out the front door. The wounded McIntyre emerges into the night with a message from the gunman. This is a suicide mission, a desperate bid to draw attention to the plight of Vietnam. They lay the blame squarely on America, accusing it of abandoning their homeland and condemning it to ruin. The time for negotiations is over. There's only one way this is ending now. The police need an opening they can work with, and the geometry of the store is working against them. Police sniper Jeffrey Boyce is given authorization to shoot the first gunman he gets a clear line of sight on. His shot will be the signal to begin the assault. The tactical team waits silently in the storage room, radios in hand, ready to spring to action the moment the green light comes through. It's only a matter of time before one of the gunmen makes themselves visible through the large storefront windows. The police know they need to level the odds before launching the assault. Their plan hinges on drawing the gunmen into a single location within the store. The plan involves putting Sean McIntyre, the freed hostage, in front of the news cameras. They know that the gunmen are monitoring the news from inside the store. It's hoped that this move will make them gather around the televisions. Unfortunately for the police, at this moment the gunmen have little interest in what's on the TV. Instead, they're forcing the hostages to make a terrible choice. The gunmen force the hostages into a single group, their weapons raised as they issue a chilling ultimatum: choose who will be shot next. It won't be fatal, they promise, just another leg shot, meant to prove to the police they're serious about getting the bulletproof vests. Still, the ultimatum is too much for Harold Brooks, a retiree, to handle, and he faints in shock. The boys laugh amongst themselves, deciding that Brooks had just volunteered himself. Loy shoots Brooks in the leg and calls the police, his voice cold and unrelenting as he recounts what just happened. He doubles down on their demands, insisting on more bulletproof vests and warning that this is only the beginning. The rest of the gunmen are now splitting the hostages up into 2 groups, flipping a coin to decide their fate. Heads, you're safe. Tails, you go in the group that will die first. To delay the executions, the police agree to exchange a vest for 9 more hostages. Priscilla Alvarez has chosen to go out and recover the vest, her wrists tied behind her back and speaker wire wrapped around her waist. The makeshift harness leads back into the store, where one of the gunmen is ready to reel her back in if she tries to run. A radio call to the assault team alerts them of the exchange. It'll be their best opportunity to take a shot at one of the gunmen, reducing the number of hostiles from 4 to just 3. More importantly, it'll increase the odds of recovering hostages alive. The police are under no illusion that any more hostages will actually be released. The assault team checks their camera feed, carefully scanning the electronics store. None of the gunmen are near the door to the storage room, clearing out the first obstacle in their plan. On the store side, several boxes are stacked against the door, but it's nothing they can't handle with brute strength. Leading the assault will be Sergeant Bill Kelly and investigators Mike Hamill, Greg Peterson, and Roger Stanfill, all armed with a variety of either H&K MP5s, MP5 SD3s, or an AR-15. Directly behind them will be Sergeants Don Devlin, Charles Price, and Gordon Smith, armed with SIG P220 9mm pistols. They significantly outgunned the hostage takers, who are armed with 3 pistols and a shotgun. But the assault team isn't concerned about themselves. They're concerned about the over 30 hostages still remaining inside. Miss Alvarez stumbles out of the glass door, shoved forward by one of the gunmen. The door remains propped open, allowing him to stay hidden behind her as she makes her way outside. Alvarez moves slowly, her steps hesitant, each one bringing her closer to the police waiting with the bulletproof vest. Behind the scope of his sniper rifle, Sergeant Boyes steadies his breathing, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. With every step she takes, she edges further out of his line of fire, revealing more of the gunmen crouched behind her. Halfway to the police, Boyes gets the sight picture that he's been waiting for. He squeezes the trigger. Even as the firing pin is igniting the primer in the cartridge, the gunman decides something is wrong and jerks Alvarez back. The crack of the rifle echoes across the scene, but by the time the bullet reaches its mark, the glass is in the way. The round deflects up and to the left, veering away from a fatal shot and tearing through the gunman's ear. He lets out a scream, terror and pain twisting his face as blood streams down his neck. Clutching at his mangled ear, he loses his grip on the speaker wire. Alvarez seizes the moment, breaking into a frantic run towards safety. Pandemonium strikes. At the rear of the store, the assault team gets Boyes' order over the radio. Go! They throw their combined weight against the door. The barricade on the other side topples with a heavy crash, but the scattered boxes slow their advance. They push through, clearing the debris as quickly as possible. 3 or 4 agonizing seconds pass before the team breaches the store, their weapons raised and ready. At the front of the store, the hostages and gunmen have dropped to the floor. Long opens fire with his pistol, aiming at the hostages lined up at the front of the store. The other 3 gunmen run around in a panic, but soon begin to fire toward the hostages. Outside, the media cameras remained fixed on the horrifying spectacle unfolding in plain view. Through the massive glass windows, the world watches in shock as the carnage plays out. The assault team is rushing ahead from the rear of the store, clearing 100 feet in a matter of seconds. The gunmen notice the police assault and turn to open fire. Quang Tran is immediately dropped by a well-aimed burst from an MP5. Pham Nguyen fires at the assault team, who quickly return fire, but Pham ducks low and slips out of sight in the chaos. The hostages seize the moment and dash toward the door, desperately seeking safety. Investigator Greg Peterson, at the head of the assault, faces off against the gunman wielding the shotgun, but he is just a second too slow. The gunman has the drop on him and is already squeezing the trigger. But fate is on his side. Peterson steps on the speaker wire used to harness Miss Alvarez. At that exact moment, one of the police officers outside grabs Alvarez and yanks her to safety, causing the speaker wire to tighten up and trip Peterson. Peterson hits the ground, his body hitting the floor just as a spray of metal pellets rips through the air where his face had been only moments before. Devlin and Kelly rush to flank the shotgun-wielding gunman as he works the pump action, but it's too late. Devlin and Kelly's combined fire cuts the gunman down on the spot, killing him before he even hits the floor. Believing Peterson to have been shot, possibly even dead, Devlin calls for a medic over the radio. The rest of the assault team is scrambling in a frantic search. 3 of the gunmen have been accounted for and eliminated. The 4th is missing. The store falls silent, the sharp echoes of gunfire replaced by the pounding of footsteps as hostages make their desperate escape. The officers hold their positions, their eyes scanning every corner, every movement. They know the last gunman could open up on the police or now the rapidly fleeing hostages at any moment. The quick but frantic search ends as Price and Hamill come across a body on the ground. Turning him over, they discover Loy Nguyen, alive but wounded and wearing only the bulletproof vest. The entire affair has lasted only 30 seconds, but even still, the police assault has failed to prevent a tragic outcome. The gunmen managed to shoot 14 hostages in total, mortally wounding 3. One of the wounded suffers a miscarriage. Store employees Chris Edwardson and John Lee Fritz, as well as customer Fernando Gutierrez, lay dead. Loy Nguyen would survive his injuries and later be arraigned and charged with 54 felonies. A jury would end up awarding him life in prison rather than the death sentence that the state had originally asked for. It was a decision that closed one chapter of this harrowing ordeal, but it left scars on the community. What's your take on the gunman's motives and the events that unfolded? Were the police tactics spot on, or could they have done better? Drop your thoughts below. Now check out Crazy Rescue Mission of Hijacked Airplane, Operation Entebbe, or click this other video instead.